So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very highly requested meetup around design systems in Figma. I am Tina Øved, and I'm going to be your host for today. We are very happy to see so many people joining, and we actually have a record, Alfred, as I told you before. So we have 320 people that have signed up. So that's something we're over the moon by all the support. So thank you for that. And of course, we hope that all of you have had a lovely morning so far. This time we are welcoming you, Alfred. Alfred will share his experiences and give tips and tricks on how to create design systems in Figma. I know Alfred from my time at Bang Olufsen, where he was the designer behind the design system for the Bang Olufsen app, which actually made it possible to bring in 60 or more than 60 products into the app at once. So that was very, very great work being done there. Alfred is now a freelance UI designer, so grab him if you need any help with UI. The agenda for today is that when I'm done with all these practicalities, Alfred will start his talk. We'll try to keep track on time. We know this is very important to you, so we'll try to do our best. You can ask questions in the QA section here in Zoom, just below. We'll have a bit of time at the end to answer questions, but we'll also continue after 10 with questions if you want to join that one as well. And for those of you who have other meetings and other obligations, no worries, we'll also record that session and we will share the recording during the next couple of weeks so you are not left out. Furthermore, you'll have a modified version of Alfred's slides as well. So I think that was it. And then for those of you who do not know Preely is the self-service platform for unmoderated remote user test. It consists of 3 areas where you can create your test and distribute it. You can also host your own test panel. And then we have our analytics where you can look into different statistics and different insights and numbers as well. We're also planning different UX meetup like this one, and we actually have the next one already booked in the calendar, and that's going to be June 10th, where we're joined by Lego. So keep a close eye on our website and our social media for an invitation for that one as well. So I think that was all the practicalities. So good morning and welcome, Alfred.
Thank you.
Great to see you. And long time no see.
Yeah, likewise. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Tina, for the introduction. Yeah, so this is a talk on creating and using design systems in Figma. It's mostly sort of my experiences written down. So if you have any questions or anything, just write in the Q&A thing, and I'll be happy to try to answer what I can. So yeah, first I will just talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about sort of design systems in general, and then I sort of divided it into 2 parts, like the visual identity part and sort of the components parts, and then I have like a resource thing and the questions in the end. Yeah, so yes, my name is Alfred Nerstu. I'm a Swedish designer currently living in Copenhagen. I met Tina at Bang Olufsen, where I worked and designed the Bang Olufsen app. So that was really nice experience working with like a company with such sort of design heritage. You could really sort of take, delve into that, and yeah, pretty product pictures and so forth. Before that, I worked at Us2, digital product studio, and worked on a bunch of different projects, mostly app related things. And I started my career working with music and UI. I worked at a startup that did like a MP3 player that was called Pacemaker. And I worked at Reason Studios, who would make this sort of music production software. And I also freelanced for Native Instruments, who also is like music software company. Yeah, so right now I'm running a company called Studion, where I do UI design and development together with my developer friends. So design systems, so it's not something new. It has existed for quite a while. This is, of course, the unique 1972 Olympic Games, like classic graphic design example, almost to the point of being a cliche. But it's still worth looking at, I think. Really beautiful colors and like very systemized with the logo. And even the times in the same places and the pictograms, and yeah, it's really inspiring. But yeah, now I guess why it's on the agenda is the rise of the digital products, and they've been quite engineering focused, and now we're seeing a big shift towards design and putting it in as system. So are design systems the holy grail for interface design? No, no, I wouldn't say so. It's so the circumstances that you work in are seldom ideal. So I've been working like a few different projects, updating an old app to a new design system, merging similar apps into one. So like there's always circumstances that make it harder for you, and it's almost like you add on another project in addition to the product you're designing. So yeah, I don't think you should look at it as sort of this holy grail thing. But I have the solution, which is the viable lean design system thinking. But I think, but like building, great products, it's sort of the same approach. It takes time. You have to iterate, and to make it really good, like you have to maintain it over time. So that's, I think it's a good approach to have. Yeah, so like this is a simplified way of looking at it, but I'm thinking, it's the visual identity part, which is sort of the soft part, and then there are the components, the actual building blocks, sort of the hard part. So let's start talking a little bit about the visual identity. So often brand guidelines and visual identities are focused on print and marketing. That's where sort of they come from. It's starting to change, but it's still sort of my experience that most things that you have to work with are not aimed at you. So so the goals, of course, for visual identity is the same, whatever the distribution channel, but the needs are not. So the goals with the visual identity, tell who you are, be recognizable, give some kind of personality, credibility, hopefully, and over time build some loyalty. But where sort of marketing and communication is more one-way communication, design systems for digital products, it's two-way interaction, and you're constrained by screen sizes and actual tasks that people need to perform. So you have less space and room to work with. So one thing I like to do in the beginning is to talk with the developers and decide on some viewports and breakpoints to design for. And I know these are some sort of industry terms, but with viewport I refer to like the size of the screen, and the breakpoint is the sort of shift where the layout can change between sizes. Yeah, so this is good to have set up in the beginning, and I usually, perhaps if we have these 5 different sizes, you know, decide to focus on the sort of normal desktop one, the 1440, and the big mobile, the 414, and then have the others sort of just look that it works. It depends, of course, on the scope of the project and the time you have. Yeah, so the different parts of the visual identity, typography, color, layout, spacing. I also like to sort of have the logotype in sort of this foundational part. So you sort of you have your building blocks. So yeah, let's start with typography. Classic sort of graphic design knowledge, you know, often suggest you should have max 3 sizes or something like that, which I don't think applies for UI design. So these examples here are Android material design and Apple human interface guidelines. Those I think are also good starting points, but yeah, you can see there's a lot of sizes, and just an example here from the Bang Olufsen app, you can see there are quite a few different sizes, and yeah, it's good to have something to work with hierarchy. And when creating sort of your type scales, I usually refer back to the viewport sizes and create several scales. Possibly not all sizes change, but headlines especially on mobile and a big desktop. It's nice on a big desktop to get the headlines a bit more sort of size. And yeah, this is some examples from projects I worked with, like here, 3 different sizes, and here 5 different sizes, and here a different one where it was more not tied to a specific size, but more general, which made it sort of quite flexible. Also, speaking from experience, you should like not do your type scales in parallel, like this top level. That doesn't really work. We've figured out the hard way. So a better approach is to, yeah, the small sizes are sort of similar, and then as further you go, the more difference it is. Over to color. So this is old blog post that I often refer back to and try to live by, that is called Never Use Black. And it's this theory that black, like pure black, doesn't exist in the real world. So in the blog post, he uses this example of this artist who makes these really sort of saturated shadows. Those are perhaps like an exaggeration of real world, but it's something like nice about bringing some life and color into it. And it also ties back to the thing with the visual identity, where when you have very little space to work with, then try to use the little space you have. So if you, instead of black, use a dark shade of your brand color or like a hue, then you immediately communicate something just by displaying text instead of just having black and being quite linear. And the same with typography. I think it's quite nice to have a lot of shades to work with. um, in the same hue. Like for bottom states, yeah, working with hierarchy, you can highlight things, and yeah, so that's also quite nice. And opposite, like what classic graphic design knowledge suggests. So when you working with brand manual, or you inherit a project, you often get quite limited color palette to work with. So what I used to do, or yeah, is to first try to understand the colors. So yeah, so in this case, I made it myself, so it doesn't really make sense. But when you inherit a project, or it's not you who made it, it can be nice to sort of, yeah, get an understanding of the colors. And how I usually do it is, yeah, you know, every hue has a value in the color circle. So you can, you know, in Figma, you have this little value here. And yeah, I just try to plot them out on the color wheel and see sort of relations. So this system in this presentation is very simple. So you have this green color here, which is actually, yeah, it's this cyan, but it's a little bit darker at 180 degrees. Secondary color, this purple, which is, yeah, 270 degrees here in the three quarters. And then the beige color is in the middle of cyan and blue, which is here at 240. So it just gives you a sense of the relationships, and you can, like, if we would to add a fourth color, like, it would make sense to, you know, expand in sort of the same, okay, should it be over here, or yeah, it can help you work with the palette. After that, I just try to expand the palette. So adding like lighter shades, darker shades, to give you more to work with. And then finally with the color, I check the contrast. So yeah, you can do it like for the primary color and secondary colors, and just see that they work from an accessibility point of view. And Figma has a plugin called Contrast, which is quite nice.
Alfred, we actually have a couple of questions about the colors, so I think I'll just drop in and then ask you them, so we have it in context. So Ida Sophie is asking, how many colors would you recommend to have in the color palette?
Yeah, so I think it is, yeah, I haven't mentioned it here, but I think there are two different types of colors. So one is sort of the brand color, or like, yeah, your main colors that you use. And that, yeah, that's really tied to your brand, but like 2, 3, I think is a good amount. But then you also have functional colors that you may or may not want to use, like, you know, green for it's approved, or red for it, some kind of alert, or stuff like that. So that might also be worth looking into. In a past project, we sort of identified 4 different colors from the brand and from the sort of material that they had. One was sort of the main color, another was an accent color, and then two colors were more supporting. But one of them was a yellow, so that we decided to use for sort of information. So you can sort of, you can work with it a little bit, but it's also a little bit dangerous to apply too much function to a brand color. So you have to sort of thread a little bit carefully there. Yeah. As for hues, like the shades, shades, I mean, it's almost the more the better. But yeah, so you have to sort of keep track of them, I guess. But yeah, 10. Yeah, it depends. Like,
Yeah, it makes sense.
yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for the question. Um, yeah, moving on. Layout. So I don't like, it's very dependent on your content, but I like to keep it quite simple. You know, simple divisions or simple aspect ratios. 1:1:2:1, 3:5, or like not complicated too much. Um, with layout, it's that annoying thing with margins that sort of eat into your content and your divisions, but that it's like, yeah, it's hard to get around. Yeah, what I mean is, if you have, for example, some content that is free on the background, and then you have a card, that card has an inner margin. So yeah, but that's how it is. Spacing, yeah, also quite simple, I think. I like to just use these, multiples of 8, which is quite native to digital systems. But if you have these set spacing things, it's more consistent, and developers will also like you because they can sort of code these, so they just enter one of these spaces. So yeah, I think it's worth having. And yeah, when you work with sort of multiples of 8, I like to always go in and change the nudge amount. So by default, if you press the arrow key, you move the object 1 pixel, and if you hold shift, you move it 10 pixels. But if you change this to 8, then it's very easy to move stuff around in these multiples. Three clicks will then be 24, and so forth. Yeah. Was there any more question?
Boom. Yeah, there's coming more in, and I think there's something about colors still. And so,
Yeah, colors are.
so yeah, Adam is asking about the colors.
Yeah.
You said that you need more colors than you think, and then the question is how to make sure that the designers will use the right colors and consistency will be maintained across different parts of the product.
Yeah, no, but that's sort of that's the challenge, I guess. So in the recent projects I work with, it's been like, okay, we're creating the design system and the product at the same time. So in those projects, it has been nice to have quite a wide palette, and like, as you're designing, getting to know the colors and okay, which works together, like where are the contrasts good enough, how could we highlight different things, use the colors. But yeah, I think it's just about establishing those rules. And yeah, I think that design system can help in that. If you create components, okay, this type of component always have this color. And one thing which is also nice, like if you have different hues and the shades, so in a, yeah, to name them the same thing. So like the lightest is blue 10, and then blue 20, 30, 40. So then it also makes it easy to switch between the colors and maintain the hues, because you know the number. This should be like body text is always blue 100, okay, this is a help, so then it should be yellow 100.
Yeah.
So work with it like
Yeah.
that.
Then we actually have a question. I think that goes very much in line with what you're saying, Alfred, because Bailey is asking, is the design system intended to mostly be used by designers, or should it be useful for developers as well? And I think what you're saying is right. It's so helpful for the developers as well, so they can actually use it for looking up things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, and I haven't put it in here, but an interesting part is like in like the last couple of years in sort of development trends, all the latest frameworks are also based on components. So this sort of approach works quite well, because then you sort of, for each component that you make, the developers also make a component, and then so you sort of you work on a component basis, and then from a lot of products now, I don't do sort of screens. So the developers look at the sort of UX wireframes and just take the components and create the page. So I think like the developers should absolutely have access to the design system and be able to check all the components, but I don't think they like have editing rights, like but they just for sure can go in and look and see spacing and colors and how it looks.
Yeah, I guess it's a good guiding book, right, for them.
Yeah,
So if they are in doubt of things, then they can actually just look it up there, because a lot of the UI things are put in there.
yeah,
And
for sure.
how
And that's a nice thing about Figma, that it's online, so you can just share a link to the document and
yeah. Awesome. Awesome. I have like that. That's actually for us. So yeah, this talk is being recorded, so you are very welcome to distribute it to your UI and UX team. And the slides are also going to be shared afterwards. And then I'll get you go along with the
yeah,
talk as well.
yeah. So just in this sort of foundation, I like to have the logo type like different sizes and stuff to use in there as well. I don't have so much to say about it, but yeah, the manual might dictate a minimum size, and yeah, just to have sort of the foundations in one place. And then we have the components, and as it's very sort of dependent on your project, I'm more going to talk about some tools in Figma that you can use. And the first one is auto layout, which is really like have changed my workflow completely, and made me almost go crazy late last year when they updated how it worked, and I had to relearn it. But now it's sort of quite stable, and yeah, I really enjoy it. So we have this sort of card component that we're gonna build, and as you see, it doesn't look that good. But let's try to fix it. So first, just select all the layers and group it with Command G. Then it's sort of then you can press the little plus character there in the right pane next to auto layout, and it will sort of create this box for you, and it will take sort of an amount that it think like where it was placed, so it will like have a median amount there, which happened to be 34. And you can change the direction, so you can do vertical or horizontal, and it's quite powerful also to nest them, so you can have something vertical in a horizontal and so. But yeah, so it still doesn't look good, so let's change these. So okay, so now we have 32, And this is the value between elements. And here is the margin around. So already looking better. And when you have auto layout, you can select elements and use the arrow keys to move them around. So you sort of, you give up on the individual placement, like, you know, moving objects yourself. So now it does it automatically, which is quite handy. So all the alignment and positioning is taken care of by auto layout. So yeah, so I moved the headline below the image, but the title and the description, it looks a little bit far away from each other. So now I can select those two, create a new group, and like press auto layout, and then we created sort of a nested auto layout. And like by default, it will just take the amount that is there. So yeah, you know, you remember we had 34, but as this is inside, like the margin is now 0, because yeah, it's the outer thing that has the margin. So now we can just change this to 8, for example, and it looks much better. But the card is actually a bit higher, but we still want that date to be in the bottom. So then we can press the little icon to the right, which looks like this, which let us control sort of alignment and spacing. And in there we can, in a little drop down, select space between instead, and then it would sort of distribute the contents to, yeah, space between. But now sort of the text is a little bit far away from the image. So now we can group those and create a new layout, and then change it back to 32 that we have. And now, you know, when if this text is longer, it will just go down, and it works like that. You can also select like that the whole card should. I think I have it. Yeah, here. So it, you know, hug contents, it says. So if the text is longer, it will grow. And yeah, I think this is super powerful, and I use it all the time. Then we have variants. So variants were released late last year. It's a really nice way to group your components. So for example, if you have this bunch of buttons, you know, each of them is a component of their own. We can now sort of group them together. So in order to turn them into a variant, it's important to get the naming right. So what I done, like the name of the layer of each of these. So what I done is like, and you use this sort of slash thing. So I named them primary default, primary hover, primary pressed, primary focus, secondary, tertiary. So you see sort of the idea there. And then you can select them all, and you, in the right pane, you have this thing pop up where you can combine as variants. And then we get this. So then it sort of detects these different sort of slash words that I wrote. And if you want to make it even nicer, you can write them with capital letters in the beginning, I guess. And then you can sort of name your, you saw that they called just property 1, property 2, and now you can name them priority, state. And then when you get a button, like when you use a button component, you get these sort of drop downs. So you can select primary, default, and you can change. So it's very, very simple and fast to change between the different states and priorities that way. And you can also, in the slash thing, for example, if you want to, in some buttons have an icon, you can write, for those with icon, you write true, and for those without, you write false, and then you would get a little switch here to turn on and off. So it's like you can do, yeah, these sort of values, or you can do on off things with true and false. So also quite powerful. Yes, then yeah, I have actually added another one, but first I only had one resource, that's why it says resource. But yeah, so this is two things from Figma. So they have a site called designsystems.com where they publish articles and yeah, really interesting stuff. You can sign up for updates there. Designsystems.com, and then sort of the help.figma.com, also super good sort of articles on how to use all the Figma features. Yes, quite quick.
Very quick, actually. So maybe we can actually keep into like 1 hour today. So that's actually awesome. Yeah. So the questions are ticking in. So I think I'll just take them like from top and then see, maybe we have answers to some of them and maybe don't. So Dominic is asking, similar to the type scale, do you ever change your spacing according to the viewpoint size?
Yes. So yeah, for sure. One thing is sort of the margin around the content. So for like a small phone of 320 pixels, the old small phones, yeah. Then I usually use 16 pixels because that's sort of the standard on those. But on the new bigger phones, they have 20 pixels margin. So then I go 20, and for iPad perhaps 24, and then desktop 48. So yeah, definitely changing the spacing also.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So Stine is asking, why do you prefer 8 as units instead of 10?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just it doesn't matter. Like you can use whichever you want. But it's something with sort of the history, like typography also is those classic 72, and yeah, it's just ingrained in computers. So it feels natural to me, but it doesn't matter. Like I think you should choose one and stick to it. Yeah, it's something nice to be able to use the same for typography and spacing, I guess, and measurements. But you could use tens for typography as well, if you want.
Yeah. Then we have a question from Jonas about, you said never use black, and then he's asking, like, it's a quite long question, so I'll try to, if I can boil it down, but he definitely also believes in never use black, but now he sees some trends in actually using black for fonts, font color. And then he asks, do you still think we should never use completely black, or should we convert into?
Yeah, so I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but it was this thing on the web that you should never use black, like you should use like a gray, like a dark gray for text. And I definitely think like you should keep sort of the contrast. You don't want this sort of washed out look. It's really nice with like these punchy texts. But yeah, like it depends on the brand. Like some brands might actually work good with black, but like most projects I work on are perhaps a little bit smaller, and you're trying to sort of make a little space for your own. So then I think like you're everything to gain by just adding a bit of color adding a bit of identity and personality.
Makes sense. Then a couple of people are asking about or curious about how you're organizing the system within Figma, and if you can share some examples.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that my presentation is lacking examples. I can't really share so much what I'm working on, but yeah, so I like to keep one page for the sort of foundations where you have typography, colors, sort of layout and grid and spacing and the logotypes. So that's there, and then iconography on one page, and then sort of components. It depends on how many you have, so you can sort of divide them up. But so it's the structure of the design system file. Yeah, so how it works in Figma is that if you place components inside a frame, it will sort of use the frame's name as organization when you then try to access your components from other files. So I just try to, do a frame and place related like form elements, all of those in a frame, buttons in a frame. Yeah.
Makes sense. Daniel is asking, do you use Figma as a documentation tool for your design system?
Yeah, so I actually had some slides about that I removed. So there are, all these kind of wiki tools, Zero Height, Confluence, Gitbook. I think I've worked with all of them in different projects. Like if it's a big project and it's a big team and then I think it makes a lot of sense to do like documentation in a place like that. But for smaller things, I think Figma is fine. Like you can add text there to explain, and you can. So I think Figma is great for documentation.
Yeah. And it's also nice just to have it like collected one place, right? So you don't have like something in SharePoint and then something in Figma and then something like somewhere else, right?
Yeah, the risk is always that something is not updated and somebody isn't looking, and so yeah, I like to keep it in one place.
Yeah. That's the beauty of it. So Franco is asking, how is your collaboration with other designers when it comes to updating components in the design system?
Yeah.
It's tough, right? Because it's a lot around the whole process within the organization as well.
Yeah.
If you're sitting together in a team, or if you have distributed designers all around, right?
Yeah. No, but I think it comes down to like your team setup. Like, is there a review process, and stuff like that. I guess like at some point, like one component might be used like in many different apps, many different places. So if you change it in any sort of fundamental way, it's going to have a huge impact. So I guess like the longer time goes by, like the more no, I don't have a good answer. I think it's sort of just you have to set up some processes for how it works and when you can update and who approves what. And I've mostly like recently worked. Yeah, either it's really big and then you don't really touch it, or you sort of you tread carefully, or it's small and you have close collaboration with everyone in your team.
Yeah. Then we have a comment from Anna from Undo. Hi, Anna, we know you. So she knows it's quite controversial using black, but they actually do it. So just not to scare everybody off. It's doable to use, and they have very huge success in actually doing it. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, no, but I think, I think actually the opposite, like not using black is the controversial point, but yeah, it's just, I think it's a nice little tip if you want to sort of easy way to yeah, stand out a little bit more.
Exactly.
But yeah,
And you can also see, just I can see there is actually a lot of comments around the black thing, and it's also just nice to say that it actually sparks a conversation around the color use as well. So maybe we are not like truly believing in like we should never use black, or we should, but it actually sparks a great discussion
yeah,
of
yeah,
of yes or no and why as well, right?
yeah, and yeah, like never use black, like it's also a title that's meant to sort of provoke, like of course you can use black, it's not but it's just a tip that I kind of like and
Yeah.
try to use.
And it's also like great, right? Because then you actually also start thinking out of the box and looking into the other colors that is actually on your palette, and see if you can actually like do something with them, and then use it to create something completely new, right?
Yeah, and that's quite nice. Like you can use sort of color coding in a way. So in a recent project, so we had like sort of the main brand color, so we used the dark shade of that for the majority of the content. And then there is like a edit mode. So all the form fields and sort of edit things are in a secondary color, but you know, the same dark. So you notice that you enter a different mode, and it's like the distinction is clear. It's both are on brand and both are sort of harmonious with each other, but it just gives a little bit more life to the UI.
Yeah. Then Nikolai is asking, I think that's a quite good question. So hi Alfred, loose or tight for the usage rules? I mean, would you be very specific when creating guidelines, or are these or are there areas where you have experienced that it works better to be more loose?
Yeah, I think like it's quite hard to make a design system that is sort of all encompassing. Like there will always be this sort of, oh, this app needs this kind of interaction. So um, um, but yeah, it's a balance. Like if you're too loose, then you sort of lose the point of design system. If you like, okay, I will edit this button, I will, so like some main components I think should be, those are like what they are, but yeah.
Yeah. So you have room for jamming a bit when it comes to
Yeah,
as well.
I think yeah, for sure. Like it's the goal is not to have the design system. The goal is to have the product, so, and to make that sort of fulfill the task that it has. So
Yeah. Then we have a question: how do you communicate the components' behavior to developers?
yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
question. Um, yeah, so yeah, there are a few different things, I guess. Like states, those you can show, like you have different variants for different states. Animations, like Figma supports some simple animations, like when you prototype stuff. But then I think like either you go into After Effects and do something more high fidelity, or you just talk to developers and explain what you want to achieve. Um, yeah, what else can there be in terms of yeah, so for example, what I often do with form elements is, you know, you create the different fields, but then you also create a component that is, you know, with the title and the help text and extra button, and then you can turn on and off those different sort of elements within the components. And then you of course have all the different variants. Okay, this component can have this extra thing or not. So yeah, just try to be quite transparent. But like a design system is not an excuse for not talking to the developers. So
I think that's a good point, actually.
yeah, and yeah, that's even further point. Like the design system is not the end goal. Like the design is not the end goal. It's the developed thing that is the end goal. So
Yeah.
you should always look at the product and see how stuff works. And yeah.
And I think that's quite a good point, right? And you also mentioned it during your talk, saying, often when we start, especially in the big organization, when we start creating these design systems, it becomes a project in itself. And it's sometimes also detached a bit from what is going on in the organization, because then you just sit and want to create this, and then everything just like runs in its own, on its own pace, right, on the side.
Yeah.
So I think quite interesting.
I recently I did this whole grid of buttons with different hover states, and I really thought through it, and like it was logical and it was really nice.
Yeah.
And then it got implemented and I tried it, and it felt like, yeah, it felt wrong.
Yeah.
So so I had to redo it.
And that's also great to hear, right? Because I also think, like, especially in the big organizations, I think like startups and so on are completely different, because there you need to have something launched, right? But in the big organization where you just sit and you have time for nurse around the different elements and so on, and then you never go out and actually test it in the like real context, and then you get these shocks of being like, okay, it's so nice on like paper, but like in the real world and for the real use cases, it's just like a bit off. So
Yeah.
I think it's also great to hear that like we make mistakes as well when it comes to these things.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have a question here. How do you onboard new designers to start using the design system?
Um, um, yeah, I think it's, yeah, I don't, yeah, I haven't onboarded so many designers, but developers, like I think it's like I book a meeting with them. I just go through everything and explain the thinking behind and the reasoning, uh, and I think that's sort of gives them some insight into why it is as it is. Onboarding designers to sort of contribute to it.
But
Yeah,
also maybe just use it actually. So if you're a complete new designer coming in and you have a design system up and running already, like do you just like throw the file to them and say, okay, get familiar, or do you actually have some sessions where you sit together and go through it, so it's like more like low practical?
yeah, like a designer, I would probably sort of explain the thinking behind, like uh yeah, yeah, for sure. Like but it's a great way of sort of learning the limitations or the possibilities of the design system to, yeah, just go ahead and use it. And I done two projects. um yeah, I didn't mention this either, but the sort of the Danish government has a design system under the URL designsystem.dk, .dk, like that is used for vertical and poetical, like the public facing self-service solutions, which is a really nice design system. And I did a project using that. And then, I don't have any contact with the people who made the design systems, but they have a site with documentation and stuff. But that was really nice to sort of, okay, this is how this works. And then I run into some problems, and then I email them and ask, and like that's also, I think, a design system that you can sort of involve yourself in if you work with it a lot, and suggest new components and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that, I think it's really worth checking out. Yeah, and another project, like, yeah, where I was sort of encouraged to come with suggestions for new components, like that were missing from the design system. So I think, I don't remember the question now, but yeah.
Yeah, but we have actually like a question that goes very much hand in hand with this one. So any good existing design systems you use as a reference or inspiration?
Yeah, it depends a little bit of what you're developing for, but I think like for mobile, you have sort of the gold standards of material design and the iOS guidelines. Those are quite nice. Is there someone I really
Yeah,
enjoy?
he mentions one himself. I think he often looks into the carbon design system for
Oh
structural
yeah,
viewing and so on.
yeah, Carbon. I don't remember now who had made that, but it's some big company also who has Carbon, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, no, I think that's super nice, and quite a few of them are like open source that you can use. Um, um, no, I don't have any particular that I go to, but
no one look into. And I guess like also like Google is your friend here, right? And I guess like of course they have been Googling.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. So it's
if
just
you
nice
have
to
a
have
specific,
like, okay, this is good. This is like a standard, a standout design system that just works, right?
yeah, if you have a like, okay, I'm gonna do this component and I'm sort of unsure like what is the best practice, um, then like Google is your friend, or DuckDuckGo as I prefer. But so that's interesting that that sort of design system .dk, the Danish one, uh, that sort of lies up against sort of the Gov UK. They have a design system, and also
Yeah.
there's a US one that I don't remember the name of. So yeah, so that's really uh, really nice.
Yeah.
And
Do you know?
there is, yeah, sorry, there
Yeah,
is like
sorry.
a whole UX aspect also of like some of these components, like what is the best way to do this kind type of navigation and stuff. I'm a UI designer, so I mostly focus on that. But like there's a whole UX thing where like, okay, we have this type of component. What is the sort of best way of doing it?
Yeah, and also like the behavior and so on, right? And
Yeah,
when
exactly.
used, when it can it be used, and when are you allowed and when you're not allowed, and all these things, right?
Yeah,
So there's
yeah,
also a lot of rules going into
yeah,
normally if you work with the UX designer as well, right?
yeah. So that is a whole other aspect that I didn't
Yeah.
touch on.
I think it's like interesting, and I think I will just say always work together with the UX designer, of course, because you
Yeah,
need
yeah,
those
yeah,
competences, right?
for sure. No, but that like I do in all products. So
Yeah. It's also good to have new eyes on things and have this like more user advocate on being able to say, for instance, the example you had with when it actually were applied, it was just like a bit weird. Then
yeah.
that's the UX designer's job, making it work in that context, right?
Yeah.
So we are actually up for time now for the ones who are leaving at 10. So I'll just say something to you before you leave and before we continue with the questions. So yeah, time is up. And thank you so much for an interesting talk, Alfred. And of course, we'll continue afterwards with some more questions. And I can see we have a lot of questions coming in. So I hope that I can try to group them a bit so we can answer as many as possible. And again, for all of you behind the screen, thank you for joining. And you are very welcome to stay for more Q&A after 10, of course, as well. And for those of you who are leaving, thank you for joining. And again, we will send a recording of the whole session, also the session after 10, and also the slides as well for those of you who have asked for access to those materials. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for how we can improve these online meetups, or who should talk to next, if there's any like topics that you would like us to look into as well, like you actually said design systems, so here we are. So please let us know, and then we'll see if we can make it happen. So thank you for now, and thank you for joining for all of you who are leaving. And then